Please give it up for Rich Roll.
Thanks, man.
Good job, man. Have fun.
Hey, everybody. Before I start, can everyone just stand up and take a stretch? Take a deep breath. Let's reset. Good. Raise your hands. Awesome. Feel a little gratitude for being here today. I'm super excited to be with you guys to talk about subjects that I care very deeply about, health and fitness, of course, but more importantly, the incredible inherent power that we all have to take better control of not just our health, but our lives, to unleash the very best, most authentic versions of ourselves on the world. And I really think it's events like this that help extend that conversation. And I believe in change. I believe in everybody's inherent ability to change, to grow. And it all begins with a decision. So that's the lens through which I want to talk about change with you guys today. And we're going to start with a couple decisions that I've made over the years, some good, some not so good. The first bad decision, obviously, this penchant for stonewashed denim jacket, which is not good. It was like 1987, though. My story really begins with alcohol, for better or worse. And for me, my relationship with alcohol is something that started out like it does for a lot of people. It was fun. I had a good time in college with drinking. But that thing that began as fun soon turned into a need for me. And that need became dark, very dark. My drinking career was neither sexy nor romantic. It was not very rock and roll. It was actually pretty sad and pathetic. And I'm not going to bore you today with the details of my career as a professional alcoholic, but I would like to give you a brief snapshot of what it looked like for me near the end. I became an around-the-clock drinker. I would start the day with a vodka tonic in the shower. I would have a tall boy between my legs as I drove to work. I would sneak drinks throughout the day. I would hide my empties. My evenings always ended up in blackouts, coming to in strange locations, more incomprehensibly demoralizing situations than I care to remember that generally involved cops, DUIs, car accidents, not knowing where my car was, and once in a while, a jail cell. Now, this was not the plan for my life. I started out as somebody with a great deal of promise. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was one of the top competitive swimmers in my area. I graduated top of my class. I got into every college I applied to, got into Harvard, I got into Princeton. I ended up going to Stanford, where I competed on 2 NCAA Division I championship swimming squads. My point being that when I was a young person, the world truly was my oyster. But addiction does not discriminate. Over time, like death by 1,000 cuts, alcoholism killed my aspirations, it broke my instincts, and it left me a shell of a human being. At the end, by the time I was 31 years old, I was unemployable, I was alienated from my friends and my family, I was teetering on homelessness, and truly, utterly alone in the world. Until one day, I came to out of a blackout. Didn't feel that much different than the countless times that this had occurred before. I was shaking, confused, trying to figure out where I was, nauseous, terrified, only to realize what was dawning upon me is that I found myself in rehab in a treatment center. And this treatment center became my home for the next 100 days. And as the cobwebs started to clear, as I detoxed out of my stupor, it started to dawn on me the gravity of my situation. And I began to open up to the counselors about how I was actually living. For the very first time, I was able to be honest with another human being. And I'll never forget this counselor. He comes up to me and he says, "Rich, you have a case of alcoholism that we typically only see in 65-year-old lifelong drinkers. And if you don't sort this out, if you don't get this right, you are going to die. And I was able to hear that. For so long, I was a prisoner of my own denial. And of course, I knew for a long time that I was an alcoholic, and I kept trying to solve this problem through willpower, through self-will, which in my twisted brain was my superpower. That was what had fueled me through any success that I had achieved as a young person. But the more I applied my self-will, the more the hold grew deeper and the more desperate I became. And this counselor said, you have to let go of your self-will. This is not about that. This is not a willpower scenario. You have to let go. You have to surrender. You have to truly come to a place where you understand and embrace the fact that you are powerless, not just over drugs and not just over alcohol, but you are powerless about almost everything in life. Now, this was anathema to me for the reasons I previously stated. It took me a very long time to truly understand this rather ephemeral idea. But over time, I have come to a place of truly understanding this. And in that rehab, after I truly understood that this would be the solution, surrender, powerlessness, letting go of my ideas about how I was going to fix this problem, letting go of this idea that I was a smart guy and understanding that my best thinking had me in a mental institution. It was only when I could snap that denial and embrace life on life's terms that I could see the path forward and that I could execute on this first important decision in my life, which was to stop drinking, to get sober, and to stay sober. And that decision changed my life, changed the trajectory of my life. I would not be up on this stage today. I would not be alive today. And as I made my way back into the world, in the wake of this rehab experience, I became very intent on building the strongest foundation of sobriety I possibly could and repairing all the wreckage that I had created as a result of my drinking. It was a decade-long experience repairing all of that wreckage, but I was successful in that regard. So by the time I was 39 years old, I had all the good shit. I was a successful entertainment lawyer on the partnership track at a prestigious firm. I had the nice car in the driveway. I had met my wife. We were building this incredible home. From the outside looking in, it looked like my life was great. All the trappings of the American dream that had been the driving force in my life, all those boxes were checked. But I had overlooked a couple key things along the way. The first thing that I overlooked was my physical well-being. Physically, I was a wreck. By 39, I was about 50 pounds overweight. As you can see, I was never like morbidly obese. I was never gonna get yelled at by Jillian Michaels on a TV show. But I was like paunchy, just looked like a lawyer who's working too many hours, overweight, out of shape, workaholic, a classic couch potato sliding into middle age. I was also emotionally even worse. I was depressed, discontent, disillusioned with this all-consuming career that I didn't feel like I even consciously chose for myself, suffocating on the promise of this American dream that I felt in my heart, maybe even on an unconscious level, that was failing to deliver on its implicit guarantee, which was happiness. So not only was I unhappy, I had no idea what happiness meant. In the same way that I didn't feel like I ever consciously chose my career, I don't think I ever paused once to ask myself what would make me happy. Now, all of this was congealing, and it all came to a crisis point late one night, shortly before my 40th birthday, when I'd come home late from work, and I made my way up a simple flight of stairs to go to sleep. Halfway up that flight of stairs, I had to pause. I was winded, I was out of breath, I had tightness in my chest, I had sweat on my brow, buckled over, and really fear in my heart that I was on the precipice of having a heart attack. Heart disease runs in my family. My mother would always say, you gotta watch out what you eat, you gotta take care of yourself, blah, blah, blah. When you're a young person, it's sort of in one ear and out the other. But it was this perfect moment in time where my ill health collided with this existential crisis. All of these questions about how I was living my life, all of this confusion came to this point where I reached a scenario in which I had once again, much like that moment in rehab, another moment in time in which I was ready to make a decision. And before I get to that decision, we need to talk about how I got to this place. Well, I got to this place because I was living my life like most Americans, sedentary, stressed, sleep-deprived, and subsisting on what I like to call the window diet. Does anybody know what the window diet is? It's my favorite diet. Nobody? All right. The window diet is when you drive your car up to a fine dining establishment and you roll the window down and they hand you food. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I loved this stuff. This is how I ate for the better part of my adolescence and adult life. These are habits that I learned early and often when I was a competitive swimmer and calories were king. And they were habits that were very hard to break in the wake of my athletic career. And these foods really became my go-to comfort in the absence of the drugs and the alcohol that I could no longer use. I used food to numb the pain of my daily grind, my emotional lack of well-being. And the word addiction gets thrown around very cavalierly. I'm a chocoholic, I'm a shopaholic, but I can tell you that food addiction is a very real thing. And in my case, both before and after my struggles with drugs and alcohol, food is and always has been my drug of choice. And unfortunately, this problem is not uncommon. As I would later learn, illnesses related to nutrition have claimed more lives than in all the world wars combined. When you look at the statistics, it's actually mind-boggling. Obesity, we're at a crisis point. I created this slide like a year ago. Just recently, a new study came out that shows that 80% of adults and 1/3 of all kids in the United States meet the clinical definition of overweight or obese. And more Americans live with extreme obesity than with breast cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and HIV combined. Like, think about that for a minute. Meanwhile, heart disease is still the number one killer in America. It claims 1 out of every 3 lives. And they're predicting that by 2030, 50% of Americans are going to be diabetic or pre-diabetic. These numbers are insane when you think about it. At the same time, it's bankrupting our economy. 75% of all healthcare costs go directly to treating chronic lifestyle illness. And what really breaks my heart, but also gives me some hope, is this amazing statistic. 80 to 90% of these conditions are entirely preventable, and in many cases reversible through some pretty simple diet and lifestyle decisions. Now, me, back on that staircase, I didn't know any of this at the time. I was just wheezing, trying to figure out how I was going to not die. And so back to this second decision that I made. The second decision, this was just an excuse to show a picture of my daughter, Jaya, because she's cute. The second decision was just as bold and impactful on my life as the first one. It involved overhauling my relationship with food and lifestyle top to bottom. I don't have enough time to go into the details of this. It was not linear, it was not overnight, but it involved trying a lot of different diets, a lot of different lifestyle practices on this search to restore my vitality. And over a 6-month period, I was not very successful in doing this. Tried a whole bunch of things. I would always lapse back into bad habits, or whatever I was trying wasn't really working for me. And I was at the end of my rope, was ready to throw up my arms and just give up and say, well, maybe at 40, you're supposed to feel lousy. And I realized there was one thing left that I had not yet tried because it sounded so horrible, and that was eating nothing but plants, a 100% plant-based diet, nothing with a mother, nothing with a face. Are there any vegans here? There are some vegans here. Good for you guys. Well, I can tell you, when I first tiptoed around this. I was not very excited about this. I went ahead and tried it, but I think I did that only so I could check the box and say, I did it, and I tried everything so I could go back to eating cheeseburgers guilt-free. But what happened was rather surprising in my case, and actually a little bit dismaying, because within a week of eating nothing but plants, I had actually achieved what I was searching for. I had this resurgence in vitality, this incredible surge in energy, and I felt amazing for the first time, and as long as I could remember, since I was like a teenager, and I was like, really? It's gonna be just plants? Like, this is gonna be my life now? I'm gonna crawl around in the yard and chew grass out of the... It just sounded terrible. But it was undeniable that this was working for me, and I'm not here to preach a vegan diet to anybody. I'm just here to share my own personal experience. Plants are what make my body run the best. They have for the last 11, 12 years. And if I can leave you with any one thing, it's this very simple edict uttered a very long time ago. It's solving this equation between food and health. Hippocrates said it millennia ago, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. It is so true. My experience is that food really is medicine. And in my case, food didn't just restore my health, it completely transformed my life. Within a couple weeks of adopting what I later found out was called a whole food plant-based diet, I was bouncing off the walls. I was driving my wife insane. She was like, please go outside and leave me alone. So I dusted off an old pair of running shoes that were in my closet. My wife bought me a bike for my 40th birthday. I went back to the pool for the first time in a very long time. And I started to move my body, which is something I hadn't done since I was in college. Now, I had no designs or desire to returning to becoming a competitive athlete. That was the furthest thing from my mind. My goals were casual and modest. I just wanted to lose that gut around the midsection. I wanted to be able to enjoy my kids at their energy level. That was it. With each week, the pounds melted away pretty effortlessly. I started to feel like I was connected to my physical self once again. But the biggest thing that I started to discover was that I was reconnecting with this lost part of myself that had brought me so much joy as a young person. You know, when we're kids, we play, we have fun, we go to the pool, we run around, we get dirty, we jump in the creek. Then we're adults and we're told, you can't do that anymore. I made a decision that I just wanted to reconnect with those very simple primal things that made me happy, that put a smile on my face. And I was following this thread each week, getting a little bit stronger, pushing myself a little bit more. And then I had this crazy experience about 3 or 4 months into this chrysalis experiment that I was on. I went out for a trail run on a trail near my house in Los Angeles. It was a weekday. I just was going to run for 45 minutes, maybe an hour if I felt good. And I had this experience that I think the cool kids call a flow state, if I'm not mistaken, where everything just felt amazing. I felt like I could just go forever. Athletes are familiar with this. Creative types are familiar with this, where time drips away and you're so integrated with yourself that you're not even consciously aware of your environment. I was having this experience. Each mile I felt stronger than the one before, and I just kept going and going. And when I finished that run, I realized I'd run 24 miles. I'd never done anything like that in my life. I had no idea that my body was capable of that kind of feat. It was nothing short of revelatory for me. And in the wake of that, I thought, well, either I've just unlocked some dormant gene that I didn't know that I had, or there's something about like just eating plants that are working for me in some strange way. And it was around this time that my friends were coming up to me and they'd say, Rich, wow, you look good. You like lost weight. You have a smile on your face. It's so nice to see. They would want to know about how my skin cleared up. And I can tell you, when your guy friends start asking you about your skin, things are getting fucking weird. They say, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I said, I'm just exercising. I'm like eating plants. And that look of eager anticipation would quickly fade into ashen disappointment and then morph into grave, grave concern. And I had a lot of conversations that went something like this. You tell somebody you're going to McDonald's, that's cool. Go for a smoke, right on, dude. Let's go get drunk, sweet. If you tell somebody you're going vegan, you are a baby killer. This is what I've concluded. It's funny because when I was eating at McDonald's every day, nobody said anything to me. Nobody ever said anything like, hey, maybe knock off the cheeseburgers. Now suddenly all my friends overnight had graduate degrees in nutrition, were very concerned, gravely concerned about my well-being. They were not shy about sharing their thoughts with me. And like, look, I get it. I get it. My whole life I was taught beef is what's for dinner. Milk does a body good. And yet here I was suddenly in a very short period of time feeling better and performing better in as long as I could remember without the very foods I've been told my whole life are essential for health and of course crucial if you want to perform as an athlete. So my whole worldview was suddenly upside down. And after abusing myself with drugs and alcohol and the window diet and all these horrible lifestyle habits and too many reruns of Law and Order and like you name it, in a few months, I had been reborn, literally reborn. And I was struck by the incredible resilience of the human body, mind, and spirit to heal and to adapt when treated properly. This was like an epiphany for me, and it's an epiphany that led to a question, and it's a question that became soon an obsession for me. If I could change so drastically in such a short period of time, what other areas of my life have I been blind to? In other words, what am I capable of? What am I truly capable of if I'm willing to step outside my comfort zone? I had to know the answer to this. I had to explore this question. And this question led to this journey of discovery for myself. It's what ultimately lured me into this world of ultra-endurance sports, which in many ways I think is fair to say is the ultimate or can be the ultimate test of human resiliency. This incredible template to explore the outer limits of not just my physical capabilities, but my mental, emotional, and spiritual capabilities. And so I don't know what came over me, but in 2009, I decided that I was going to take a crack at this race called the Ultraman World Championships. Now, to sort of contextualize all of this, I had never completed a half Ironman. I had never done an Ironman. I had no business mucking around with this. Does everybody know what an Ironman is here? For those of you who don't know, an Ironman, widely considered the ultimate test of human endurance, is a very long triathlon, which over the course of the one day, you swim 2.4 miles, you ride your bike 112 miles, and then you run a marathon, all in one day. Insane, super long. Well, this race called Ultraman is actually a little bit more than twice that distance. It's a 3-day stage race, which over the course of the 3 days, you can see the stages broken down there. You basically circumnavigate the entire big island of Hawaii. Do you know why they call it the Big Island? Because it's super fucking big. This I learned firsthand. I was like, when I first read about this race, I was like, people actually volunteer for this? Like, this is insane. I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't get it out of my head. All my stick figure friends, those pesky people bugging me, they were like, this is impossible. What are you doing? You're chasing a fool's errand. Are you drinking again? You should call your sponsor. And my friends had a point. I mean, I was a 43-year-old corporate lawyer. I had no business participating in something like this, and I had my doubts as well. It's funny, when your friends are always chattering, saying you shouldn't or you can't, you start to believe that. But within 2 years of that staircase incident to this race and fueled on nothing but plants, I was able to go from this chubby, overworked, window diet addicted guy to this dude, fitter, stronger, faster than I had ever been in my whole life, even when I was swimming at Stanford. Thank you. I'll tell you, when you need a photograph like this, you get this great photographer. He knows exactly where to put the lights to make it look like super epic with all the shadows and all that kind of thing. He's like, okay, exhale all the air out of your lungs. People want to talk about the physique, but the physique, it was never about the physique for me. It was what was going on the inside. Like, my internal compass was being calibrated, and I was slowly becoming this person that I was always meant to be. But I wasn't delusional. My goal going into this race was singular. Do not die. That was it. And what happened was extraordinary. Instead of dying, I actually shocked myself and sort of surprised the endurance community by leading the race by a full 10 minutes after the first day's stage. A bike crash on the second day took me out of podium contention, but I was still nonetheless able to work my way to being the fastest American and sixth in the world that year on a swollen knee that called into question whether I even should have run that 52-mile leg on the last day. So, needless to say, this is a hallmark occasion, the highlight of my athletic career, and it brings me back to that original question: what am I truly capable of? And had I sufficiently answered that question for myself? And I had to say that I still thought that I could do more, that I had more in me to express. And it was around this time, 2010, that my friend Jason Lester, who's an amazing individual and athlete, somebody I'd trained with for these races in the past, he called me up and he proposed a challenge so ludicrous that if successful, it just might redefine the limits of voluntary human endurance. It was a feat that most said was impossible. He called it Epic 5, and it involved doing 5 Ironmans on 5 Hawaiian islands in 5 days. And I was like, I'm in. Now, this is where all my stick figure friends went batshit, losing their minds. What are you doing, Rich? This is irresponsible, it's risky, you have kids, what are you smoking? What I was smoking was this idea of pushing the boundaries of what humans are capable of. When I thought about the history of human endurance, voluntary human endurance, and thought about all of the incredible adventures, things that human beings have accomplished, it seemed like everything had been done. Every peak has been scaled, every ocean crossed, we've gone to the moon, 3 guys even ran across the Sahara Desert. Benoit Lecomte is getting ready to swim across the Pacific Ocean. My friend Ross Edgley is in the midst of circumnavigating Great Britain by swim. Every crazy adventure seems like it's been done, and yet here was a challenge that seemingly was so obvious, it was amazing no one had ever tried it before. And I just knew that we had to give it a crack, and more importantly, I believe that we could do it. And there's so many amazing stories that came out of this experience. I don't have time to go into all of them, but I'm going to tell you one, the most meaningful story that came out of this for me. This is Jason and I. We are on the island of Maui in the midst of our 4th consecutive Ironman on this adventure. And this is where the wheels were really falling off the wagon for me. We had just finished the bike leg on this, 112 miles on the bike, and it was the most excruciating, painful experience of my life. I was literally, actually sobbing the last 5 miles. I was in such pain. The saddle sores were so bad I couldn't sit on my saddle anymore. I was dehydrated. I was completely depleted. I was sleep deprived beyond none. The thing about this adventure is that we had to finish these Ironmans by a certain time every day to make the last flight off the island to get to the next island. Then we had to eat, get our gear. We had a couple volunteers helping us, but we were doing a lot of this alone. And so we were only getting like 2 or 3 hours of sleep every single night. Day 4 caught up to me. When I finished that bike leg, I dropped my bike. I was done. I walked into a shower. I just let the water roll over me. And I realized that there was no physical possibility that I was going to be able to run a marathon that night. It wasn't a matter of willpower, it wasn't a matter of determination. It was a physical impossibility. I knew Jason felt the same. He actually looks a little bit worse than me in this photo. But one of us is going to have to say it out loud, right? Who's going to tell who, I'm going back to the hotel, I'm calling this thing off? We're done. As I'm sitting here on the bumper of this car, it's in a parking lot parked right off the beach where we had started that Ironman that morning. There's a couple volunteers around us. I'm looking at them, and I'm just about to say, bro, I'm going back to the hotel. It was a good run, but it's over. And right at this very moment, from the far side over here, the beach side, walks this woman. And she steps underneath a street lamp, a halogen street lamp. And I noticed that she was wearing a teal tank top, leathery skin. She'd been in the sun too much, a little hunched over, and a brown paper bag. And she's surveying our ragtag group of people, trying to figure out what are these people doing at the beach parking lot at 10 o'clock at night. And she kind of saunters over, staggering a little bit, clearly drunk, looks us back and forth like this, and for some reason, she locks eyes with me. We're looking like this at each other, and she walks straight up to me like this and looks down at me with the bottle and goes, "Hey man, do you want to party?" Party? Do I want to? No, I don't want to party. I do not want to party. When you're that fried, depleted, exhausted, even the slightest external distraction is completely overwhelming. And I was like, just please get out of my line of sight, out of my view. I said, no, I don't want to party. She goes, okay. She starts sauntering off into the darkness, and I thought, thank you. And then another thought entered my mind. And I realized, you know what? That woman, she's not that different than me. Had I made a couple decisions differently in my life, I could very well be living her life. I identify with what she's doing. I'm one of the few people that understands why she's making the decisions that she's making. And I realized in that moment, or I suppose I should say, I choose to believe that she wasn't just some random drunk person walking up to me, but that she was in fact an angel who was sent down to remind me of how far I had come. Without making that first decision to get sober, I wouldn't be in this situation. Without making the second decision to reformulate my relationship with food and lifestyle, I wouldn't be sitting on that bumper. I was able to reflect on my life twice saved. And this trajectory, this journey that I've been on from that lost soul, sleeping on a bare mattress in a shitty apartment, who ended up in rehab, hoping to die and unable to live, to the grips of this unbelievable, fantastic adventure. I thought about my stick figure friends and how they all told me I was chasing a fool's errand. I thought about another friend of mine who's been a tremendous inspiration to me. His name is David Goggins. He's a Navy SEAL, incredible human being, unbelievably inspiring, who decided to honor his fallen brethren by tackling the 10 most difficult endurance challenges in the world. He was successful in that regard. And he said something that's always stuck with me, which is, when you think you're done, when you think you can't go one step further, you've actually only tapped into about 40% of what you're truly capable of. As I thought about all of these things swirling in my head, I actually began to lose time. I almost went into this fugue state where I don't quite know what actually happened in the moments following. All I do know is that when I came out of it, Jason and I were walking. That walk turned into a jog. That jog turned into a run. And somehow, in defiance of the laws of physics, we completed that marathon that night just before dawn broke. something I thought was absolutely impossible when I was at the peak of my athletic conditioning. Absolutely, physically impossible. We got some sleep, we went to the Big Island, and we completed that 5th and final Ironman in the Epic 5 Challenge. And all I remember about that was that it was almost like an afterthought, like a celebration of the 4 that came before it. With a good night's sleep, I felt better on that 5th one than I did on the first one. And I realized once again just how incredibly resilient the human body, mind, and spirit can be. It was like my body said, "Oh, now I understand what you're trying to do. I thought you were trying to kill me. Why didn't you tell me?" When the dust settled, Jason and I had done something that nobody else had done in history. And by 44, I had exceeded my wildest expectations of what I was capable of as an athlete. But my greatest accomplishments are not athletic. My greatest accomplishments are that I healed myself in body, mind, and spirit. And that I fulfilled this promise to live a vital life. But I realized that there was one more decision that I needed to make. This experience, these experiences that I've had in ultra endurance, left me with this desire to continue to evolve, to continue to grow, and to share the experiences that I've had to provoke positive change in others, to live more expressed, authentic, meaningful lives. Because the truth is, we all need all of you to be more of who you really are and who you can be. So the third decision that I made was a decision to return the gift, to devote my life, my ongoing growth, to serving others, to giving back the gifts given to me. So in 2012, I wrote a book. It's my story. It's called Finding Ultra. I think there's copies circulating around here. And that book started a conversation about the innate ability that we all have to change, the power of the decision, the innate potential that we all have to unlock and unleash a better, more authentic version of ourselves. And in order to continue the conversation in the wake of that book, in 2012, I started this podcast. It's a podcast on the theme of self-actualization, where I did my best and continue to do my best to convene with the brightest, most thought-provoking people that I can find to have meaningful, long-form conversations. And I could tell you, in 2012, when I started a podcast, it was not cool to have a podcast. Everybody's got a podcast now, not a lot of podcasts in 2012. But from the moment that I began it, I just loved it, because it was about letting go of my story and inviting other people's stories in. I got to share the experience and the knowledge of so many amazing people for the betterment of others. And this decision that I made to make my life about service was really about abandoning the cravings of the ego, letting go of this traditional idea of the American dream that, as I said previously, had been the driving force in my life for so long. To orient my life going forward around serving others, helping people. That is when my life truly began to expand. In fact, it exploded, expanded exponentially in the wake of this decision. And ultimately, this service-minded approach to everything that I do delivered on that one thing that I had been searching for all along, from the very first drink, to the diploma, to the job, to the car, to the house, which is a life fueled by purpose, a fulfilling life of meaning and happiness. So today, after 6.5 years of doing this podcast, it reaches people all over the world. We've eclipsed over 40 million downloads to date. But I want to close with this. I've done these crazy things, done some noteworthy, interesting things, but I'm truly nothing special. I really am not. I'm just an ordinary guy who happened to do a couple interesting things. And if my story stands for anything, it's that we're all far more capable than we allow ourselves to believe. People say that people don't change, that people can't change, and it's just BS. We're all dancing atop mountains of unlimited, untapped reservoirs of human potential. My story begins with a decision, and yours does too. My decisions were forged through pain, but yours need not be. The important thing is that you identify, you recognize that thing within yourself that requires, that demands change. You all know what it is. And you take that leap into the unknown to address it. And I promise you, if you do this, your world will expand exponentially. The universe will conspire to support you. And you will meet the best version of yourself along the way. Thank you. Okay. So